After discovering that my wife had an affair with her employer and coworkers, I secretly drained our assets and utilized the evidence to secure child custody, causing her to go bankrupt. She strolled in on me as I stared at my computer. Although she had a history of arriving home late from work, today was an exception. Nearly 10 o'clock had passed. After we finished dinner and the homework, the kids went to bed for about an hour. No one even bothered to inquire about Mom. The change to this schedule was depressing me. I have devoted the past hour to reviewing our budget. In just over a year, things had gone from bad to worse. My wife didn't seem to realize that our income had fallen and kept spending lavishly. The bills were paid just now. Perhaps we can survive for a few more months. My life plan was also something I was going over, trying to figure out if it was a mistake. For the last 18 months, I had stared at a ticking time bomb, certain that it would eventually detonate. However, I was starting to question that certainty. The length of time she remained there observing me is a mystery to me. Time seems to have slipped my mind. As of late I find myself increasingly absorbed in my own ideas. David, I want a divorce. At last, she crossed her arms and spoke with that familiar look of disdain on her face. I had no idea what I was feeling at that moment. The crippling self-doubt and contempt I felt almost rendered me numb. I attempted to hold back a laugh, but it wasn't funny. My 17-year wife ruined all we had built together after we just divorced. I hadn't felt this way in a very long time, so it almost made me smile. Happiness returned. As a final reminder of our happy days together, I stared at her for a while. I came back to reality after that. Sure, I was more proficient in programming than in managing. Unfortunately, programmers often end up in positions of power, leading departments and even managing entire projects. I became a senior product development manager in this way. Perfect job title for a salesperson. At the time, I was the most qualified because I almost single-handedly developed and oversaw 6 iterations of our flagship product line. In addition to handling staff difficulties, I could also answer customer questions. I was really familiar with our goods. With a new do and an expensive suit, it didn't matter much how much more money and advantages I got. My employment made me pleased overall, even if I missed programming. I was unable to code because my job required too many meetings and phone calls. New ideas were suggested by youthful developers. There are benefits to being the boss, even though I sometimes wish my role were different. To no one's surprise, I would have also fired myself if I had been fired from Seattle Technology Solutions. Even though I would sometimes show up for meetings, I frequently failed to fulfill deadlines. I too didn't try to avoid getting fired, but I also wasn't actively trying to keep my job. For months, I was hopeless. 3 months were needed to move forward, and an additional month was needed to find a solution that would work. In order to get my life in order again, I adopted the following mantra: breakfast, school, snack, homework, dinner, bed. My sanity was preserved by my children. Being a stay-at-home dad meant I was responsible for all the household chores and getting everyone where they needed to go. I felt appreciated since the kids loved being around me. My wife seemed oblivious to this change in our family dynamic. It was only because Laura Johnson met me at the fraternity party that I didn't miss it. No celebrations here. In preparation for life after college, I pledged to a fraternity. My grades were exceptional, despite the fact that my height, weight, appearance, and demeanor were all average. Not even when I was away from the computer was my name David, the most popular from 1980 to 1999. I mostly kept to myself, though I did make a few acquaintances. My luck turned around when I met Laura Johnson. Equally unremarkable was Laura, but I preferred the look of the average woman. She kept to herself. I observed her for a while before finally striking up a conversation with her. Our initial meeting was brief, but we continued to meet for coffee and study sessions for the following 2 weeks. Nearly 2 months later, we finally went on a real date. It was the happiest time of my life after that. After 15 years of war, we finally felt safe. There was little time spent courting and engaging. After finishing college, we tied the knot and settled into our first apartment in Seattle. We rode the bus to our first jobs together and enjoyed each other's company despite our meager incomes. In terms of our hobbies, goals, and family histories, we were almost completely in sync. When one of us was inadequate, the other was exceptional. Our social and domestic schedules were handled by Laura. As we kept on the road and enjoyed ourselves, I took care of our finances. We improved our lives in a flash, advancing in our careers, expanding our social circles, putting money down for a down payment on a house, etc. 8 years ago, Laura quit her job. A year down the road, our son Ethan was born. Our daughter Olivia came next. Our family of 6 bought a minivan, a family car, and a puppy after relocating to a 3-bedroom suburban house. Our perfectly ordinary lives were characterized by 2 kids, a pet, a home, and 2 cars. I thought I could not possibly be happier. No, I was completely wrong. I was promoted to manager not long after Olivia turned 1. It was like finally getting your due after years of being passed over without ever once grumbling. My new schedule allowed me to work remotely and only need to come into the office for meetings, and the salary increase was welcome. Money can purchase a new house, better health care, stylish clothes, and self-assurance, but it cannot purchase happiness. I went from being average to above average, and my wife, who was always stunning, appeared even more so. Life got even better for us, which was already great. We increased our retirement savings, vacation time, and quality time with our kids. Upon Olivia's arrival at elementary school, Laura expressed her desire to work part-time. A marketing firm that was just starting out hired her right away. She worked hours that were compatible with the school schedule of the children, and we were able to protect her salary. We could be able to retire comfortably by the time our children finish college. My wife's infidelity was revealed to me 2 months prior to our 15th wedding anniversary. I found proof 2 days prior to my birthday, but I didn't find out about it for weeks afterwards. I wasn't too concerned about her desire for me to pick up the kids from school, work longer hours, and be more involved at work. It didn't affect my plans, so I didn't give it a second thought. I saw her preoccupation 2 months later. It was stressful for her to try to find herself at work, she said. I took it upon myself to do more housework so that she wouldn't have to. As our relationship began to deteriorate, we broached the subject. She said she no longer needed as much pleasure, and that she felt older. Our lives took a brief upturn before resuming their downward spiral. I was afraid we would get into another fight if I brought it up again. I had nearly reached my breaking point. I needed a sweater because the weather had turned cold. Since I began doing my own laundry, I frequently got the garments mixed up. A pink lingerie store box with a white ribbon and a handwritten letter reading "Loved" caught my eye as she rummaged through her clothes. Out of nowhere, I began to wonder. Can I just wait, or should I look? Until my birthday, I'm going to sit back and watch. Pardon the packaging when I wear the contents of the box to celebrate your birthday. You can unwrap the true present. Love, Laura, the note said. I worked especially hard over the next 2 days, visiting her with flowers, massaging her feet, and preparing her favorite dinner. Her response was apathetic, as if she accepted my overtures. To keep any disruptions free on my birthday, I made sure the children completed their homework early. Arriving home late, Laura asked what dinner was planned and threw me off. The kids agreed when I suggested heading out for pizza. The servers at the restaurant wished me a happy birthday, and I thought Laura's eyes revealed surprise, but she soon recovered. I'll give you your present later, she added grinningly. The trip home was tense and almost caused an automobile accident. It seemed like an age waiting for the kids to get ready for bed and then for them to fall asleep. Laura had left on an emergency milk run and come back just before the children nodded off. She disappeared when I got to our bedroom. Moments later, she came out of the bathroom sporting a flannel nightgown, without makeup, her hair pulled in a ponytail. Furious, I inquired about my present. She dropped into bed, grabbed the lamp, then halted. Oh, I almost forgot. She handed me a small box covered with balloon paper from the nightstand. Happy birthday, darling. Then she switched off the lamp and nodded off, too stunned to even open the present. The following day, I started to feel quite hopeless. Unable to understand what had gone wrong, I kept running back over the events of the previous day. I wallowed in hopelessness for almost 2 weeks, the unopened gift mocking me. Though I had always heard the husband is the last to know, I was really in the dark. Until Laura contacted 13 days after my birthday to say she would be late for Ben's 30th birthday celebration, I never gave Laura's cheating any thought. I looked at the vacant closet space where my present had been, not sure what I said. The persistent vomiting and chest discomfort that followed made me worry about a heart attack. For a moment I hoped it were true. Laura hated the younger, dishonest advertising executive Ben Parker, her boss. Olivia ground me back into reality. She inquired almost in tears, "Are you okay, Daddy?" claiming I had a stomach problem and needed a moment. I comforted her. I left the bathroom finally. Grabbed my old scotch bottle and drank enough to wake with a terrible headache. Laura arrived home at unknown time, but the following morning she was in the kitchen with the children, as like nothing had happened. Her little shiver upon sitting down to eat removed whatever last love I harbored for her. Though I would want to say I confronted my unfaithful wife, I was too depressed. Watching her behave carelessly, I felt like a zombie becoming worse day. I stayed at rock bottom until our 15th wedding anniversary. At which point I at last resolved to act. Usually I would not have done anything. I knew I was being a wuss. My father would call me a wuss and be right if he were still living. As my wife said she had a business conference on our anniversary, the fog cleared from my mind. Given she failed to mention the date, it felt like still another degree of disrespect. On our anniversary, I drank excessively and woke up enraged, resolved to call a lawyer. I set myself on ending this farce. I was mistaken, thinking my life could not get worse. The attorney turned out my dreams. I had no proof of her cheating. Even if I did, it would not matter. I would pay alimony, she would get half of our assets, at best shared custody. For the kids' benefit, she would probably win main custody and the house. My wife was cheating, and I felt like an idiot. My despair changed to uncertainty. A few weeks later she inquired. I said, "No, honey." I then was let go, which proved to be the finest thing. Watching the news, I saw a big company go bankrupt and left workers without pensions or salaries. It struck me. We wouldn't share anything in a divorce if we had nothing. I made the decision to use our savings till absolutely nothing remained. Though I was desperate, the idea was irresponsible. 18 months went in terrible monotony. Laura had been the lifeblood of our social group I came to see. She pulled away, and I discovered I had no actual pals. I was very alone, an only child with dead parents. For 18 months, my kids were the one bright point. Still maintaining receipts for everything, I had never been a huge spender. I started withdrawing little sums of money every week, but I wasn't spending enough quickly to have any effect. I saved rather than spent the money. I changed my strategy and raised my game. Enrolling in an executive MBA program, I paid over $150,000 at a nearby university. I totally filled the kids' educational savings accounts for another $200,000 and paid cash for a new luxury SUV costing $80,000. I started withdrawing extra money twice a week and went crazy on a new closet. I would drop the kids off at the school, visit the bank, and head to the lakeside. I never gambled. I simply spent enough at the casino to leave a trail of debt behind me, and stored most of the money in a wall safe in our garage as a post-divorce war chest. Along with daily updates, I hired private surveillance on my wife and her boyfriend to compile video and pictures. It was expensive, but well worth it. Was my wife aware of my spending? Generally speaking, yes, except from gambling. She saw my new car and closet and had to approve the children's custodial accounts. She probably considered us still to be poor and never questioned them. She bought additional lingerie too, but I never mentioned anything. We lived like decent roommates, daily communication but avoiding intimacy. Spending time with my children turned out to be my highlight. I watched movies, went to parks, rode bikes, did homework with kids and encouraged their interests. I started cooking for the house, incorporating them in simple dishes. Laura showed up sometimes over the week. I never excluded her from family time, but I never included her either. She silently decided whether she wanted to join. Weekly reports on the activities of my wife arrived. I first assumed she was only working with her boss, but it turned out she was with several men from her office and finally even some clients. Was it hurting? Not exactly. Having proof didn't make it worse. I already considered her as disloyal. Her boss, Ben Parker, was only another player in her affairs. He was not a skilled lover. She treated the other 6 men generally the same way. One customer, a geeky man with glasses, seemed especially harsh with her, but the grainy pictures and videos made it difficult to tell whether she enjoyed it. Having lots of free time despite classes, kids, and gambling, I concentrated on life after marriage. I started working out and improved in bench press and endurance running. I was glad with my development even though I knew great looks and big muscles were mostly genetic. Knowing I would eventually need a job, I also looked at the newest developments in my former field. I spent hours every day picking up fresh technologies and software. Especially piquing my curiosity was my former company STS. They lacked development even though their income was steady. You lose if you just stand still. I also researched divorce closely, especially with relation to children. The children had supported me through my suffering and I wanted to be completely ready for their move. 8 months later, I began to panic. Trying to bring us back together, my wife started arriving home on time, inquiring about my day and dressing more provocatively for bed. She complained about our poor communication a few weeks later and mentioned working on our marriage. I answered with total quiet. She kept trying at reconciliation until her birthday. I left her present on the dining room table covered in the same paper I used for my previous gift. Not surprisingly, should have been the case. 6 months following my birthday, I at last opened her gift, a cheap digital watch from the impulse buy area of the convenience store. At first I was enraged, but I cooled off when I noticed their women's model matched. I bought both, then waited 18 months to present hers to her. The kids and I were out for an emergency movie night, so I missed her reaction. We got home late. Early the next day, she left. Things promptly went back to normal. She lingered late at the office, and we hardly spoke. "David, I want a divorce," she said at last. She took nearly a week to file. Her requests were almost ridiculous: spousal and child support, unequal property distribution, and allegations of mental and emotional abuse. I waited until Monday, spent 6 days camping with the children, then returned rested. Laura was looking sick in the living room by herself. She was home. Having been the main caregiver and unemployed, I had filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity, requesting the house full custody and support. Knowing I wouldn't win, I also sued her company and her 7 partners, hoping the notoriety would bring some benefit. To be really honest, I even sent her parents and best friend a DVD of her transgressions. I wanted to make sure she knew, even though I enumerated all the proof in my countersuit. Ignoring their mother, who hardly moved to address them, the children ate a snack and returned to their rooms. I settled across from Laura and got a beer. Crying and apparently in pain, she avoided looking at me for a long period. She murmured something, finally, but I was too preoccupied with savoring my beer to pay attention. "You are going to ruin me." I waited till she raised her head. God, I hope so. I expected this moment to be more dramatic, but when a tear trickled down her cheek, I felt nothing. "Do you hate me that much?" she asked. "Oh no, Laura, I don't hate you. Hate takes effort. I put all of my effort into taking care of me and my children. But I'm your wife. Stop. My wife was loving, caring, my best friend, my partner, and the mother of my children. She's gone. You're just the trumpet who took over her body. You have nothing to do with me." After a long silence, she spoke again. "I don't know what to do at this point. Is my response truly what you need?" I proceeded without hesitating. "A new life awaits you in a distant land, so long as the kids don't spend any quality time with you. I don't see any problem with you leaving. You may also remain here, but then again, no one will know about your escapades, and you never know who might recruit you. Perhaps a pathetic person who doesn't care about you will accept you. I hope you don't become bankrupt, but that's another option. Allow me to witness your anguish." You began to have fun with your employer regardless of my opinion. For months, I fantasized about giving this speech, thinking it might make a difference as I witnessed her morale decline. Nothing filled me. The future after the split was murky. The outcome of the lawsuit exceeded expectations. The 3 companies whose workers had an affair with my wife paid me over $1.2 million. I should not have expected much, as my lawyer had warned me. My ex-wife and I destroyed her business through discovery motions, depositions, and press disclosures. My wife and her boss were also mentioned in an email I sent to their clients. When things go bad, will you still want to be in a relationship with this company? Gradually, their revenue dried up. Employees quit to avoid the controversy, and the company eventually filed for bankruptcy. Ben Parker was sacked and fled town in humiliation. Though smaller, the $300,000 payout I got was more fulfilling than my prior wins. As expected, the foreclosure of attachment actions yielded nothing for me. 4 of the participating males nevertheless experienced divorces. Though I didn't care, the process tormented me as well, since individuals who understood my circumstances teased and laughed at me. I felt already like a loser. Keeping my kids safe from the aftermath dominated my worries. They were depressed for a little but quickly recovered. Getting back to STS as VP of Design and Development was my greatest triumph. Programming served as a diversion from my own inner struggle. Over 2 years, I created an add-on for STS program with competitor package integration. Less than a year later, I launched my own business selling the software and got paid $1.5 million plus an amazing deal from STS. Thinking about retirement, I realized I had to have a purpose to leave the house. My increased salary let me pay Mrs. Janet Thompson, a housekeeper and babysitter. She lived in an apartment over our garage full-time a year later. To my kids, she grew to be like a grandma, offering guidance and wisdom. I appreciated her help too, though I tried to be a kind father and loved my kids. I also was jaded and nasty. My rock Mrs. Thompson guided me. Our intimacy lost as the children grew up. I didn't despise them. It was preferable to keep my grudges away from their life. Mrs. Thompson worked for me until the kids started college, then retired. As a pension, I promised her free accommodation and board. For 15 years, she was with us, constantly pushing me to find someone to spend my life with. She went away knowing that I never opened out to anyone, and despite her efforts, I stayed alone. Apart from a few group dinners, I hardly dated. My friendships were superficial and unsatisfying. I came to be known as a cold, merciless person, and I didn't blame anyone for rejecting me. My fortune let me pay call girls on a regular basis. Generally, I sent them away. I did, however, enjoy one called Candy. Later on, Marybeth was her true name. I cut her free when she became overly attached. After we broke up, Laura struggled greatly. She spent almost a year trying to mend or establish relationships with our kids. She ignored what I advised. I made sure her employment record was well known to possible companies when she stayed in Seattle. I sent packages to her partners, including past information, when she first started dating. I wanted her to face her acts as I had to. She kept attempting to get in touch, phoning and emailing me. Some of me wanted her to suffer. feeling it was too late. I never asked for professional aid. Though I could have let my assistant handle my mail, blocked her emails, or changed my number, I did not. Her apologies amounted to nothing. I started sending her gifts eventually. From her preferred retailer, I purchased underwear. I wrapped it with white ribbon and sent a handwritten message. The card was addressed to Cow, and although my exact words were simpler, the writing said, "Go screw yourself." I'm hoping she got the meaning. One of Laura's possible boyfriends tried to make me answerable for torturing her. Drunk, he arrived up at my door, pushed me, knocked me down. That proved to be his error. I had rage, pure, unspent hatred for my ex-wife and her lovers. Not any particular training, never participated in a fight. He turned into the channel for my anger. I came out with a cracked rib and a bump. He had good fortune in survival. First-time offender, he admitted guilty to misdemeanor assault and trespassing, received probation. His years of recovery and reconstruction surgery most certainly had more influence. Laura never gave me another call. After a year, when she landed a job cleaning rooms at a hotel 700 miles away in rural Idaho, I stopped following her. 16 years later, I saw her only once more at our daughter's wedding. I know the kids got back in touch with her after college. I stopped them not once but twice. Time had not been good to her. She had developed deep wrinkles, weight, and smoking tendencies. She appeared ancient and sloppish, yet I still saw the woman I had loved. I felt nothing for her. But I noticed her seated by herself at the rear of the chapel, chatting momentarily and politely with our daughter. We kept 30 feet apart, and she avoided trying to talk to me. I saw a little gold band with a little diamond on her finger when I watched her waiting for a cab. Considering maybe she had better than me, I grinned for the first time in a long time. I went over, fixed on the ring, then met her eyes. Her eyes clearly reflected a great gloom. "By the way, you wrecked my life," she remarked. I stared at her left hand, then back to her gaze. "I hope he makes you happy." "I'm glad you found someone," I added. I headed fast toward my car where my driver was waiting. Jonathan said, "Good evening, Mr. Johnson. I hope you had a pleasant evening." "Are we going to the club?" I said. "Everything went according to plan, Jonathan. Return to the house we shall go. For tonight, I would like solitude." "Naturally, sir," Jonathan responded as we drove away. I resisted the need to turn around, but I couldn't help but wave goodbye the second I caught a glimpse of her. However, upon first glance, David Johnson did not impress. He was charming, intelligent, and easy on the eyes. Unlike most men, he lacked physical attractiveness. Our paths crossed at a frat party. The darkest hour of my college experience, when my sorority sisters abandoned me. Despite their promise to remain a unit, they ignored me in favor of hanging out with the popular crowd. 2 hours later, while I waited for them, a group of inebriated men approached me. David then approached me, gave me the silent treatment, introduced himself with grace, and we had a little talk before he departed. Having a conversation with Laura was delightful. A coffee date is something I'd want to arrange for us. Please find my contact information below in case you are interested. I appreciate our conversation. It was at that moment that my semester reached its peak. After nearly not calling him at all, I did it after a week. We met for coffee, and his probing inquiries helped us strike up a conversation. In every area of study he excelled. He could have studied anything, but he was majoring in computer science. In particular, he offered to help me out with my difficult classes in ancient philosophy. David never once looked away from me, obviously thinking about me as an individual. We started our study sessions together on Friday night. He helped me study for my philosophy test for 3 hours straight in the library. He was patient and never made me feel foolish. Upon hearing that I had passed the test, he expressed his immense pride and remarked that he loved spending time with me. David was unique among guys. Throughout the week, he avoided temptation and parties in favor of his studies. We didn't go on regular dates, but he sent me messages and contacted me daily. We met at the library for coffee and lunch on occasion. His curiosity about my life, interests, and goals was unending. In response to my question about his worst fear, he said he was afraid he would fail as a father. He was an only kid when his parents passed away while he was a high school senior, and he lived with an unsupportive uncle. David longed to tie the knot and start a family, but he was afraid he lacked the parenting skills necessary. At the moment he ceased speaking, he appeared to be seeking an explanation. "Is it excessive?" he inquired. "No, David, just sufficient." David asked whether I was free on Saturday about 4 weeks into our relationship. I agreed, and he said he would drop by lunchtime, the days before. That Saturday seemed unusual. David would not share his intentions, and my sorority sisters were gossiping and grinning at me. I felt as though I would snap. Arriving, he and his 3 fraternity mates were lugging a big cooler and trays of food while wearing maroon and sky blue clothing. David had a DVD, a West Ham jersey for me, and a great smile. He invited to view the house's large room. The house was painted in West Ham colors as we rounded the bend, and everyone began chanting. I surprised myself. Once I had grumbled to David about missing a family trip to England to witness my distant relative play for West Ham United due to a test. David set up a friend to videotape the West Ham game at a sports bar to find out when to start the team. He taught his buddies and sorority sisters the team chant, then watched the game. They fried fish and chips and brought English ale. We shouted, drank, and sang throughout the game. David quieted everyone in the 72nd minute and urged me to keep an eye. My cousin scored his first Premier League goal right here. For me, it was the best gift anyone had ever given. David and his buddies cleaned and headed off after it was over. David mentioned he would give me a call late. I was left on my own to handle the mocking about my dreamy eyes. It was well worth the effort. Notes, our phone calls, and coffee carried on for a few more weeks. One day I observed David appeared somewhat anxious while drinking a cappuccino. Everything fine, David? What? Oh yeah, of course. I was just wondering if you had any plans for Friday night, and if you were free if you would want to have dinner with me, you know? Like a date? I would like to have dinner with David. I was startled by the relaxation on his face, then swiftly replaced by the broadest smile I had ever seen. He kept grinning as he drank his coffee, then as we left and as he waved farewell on his way to class. She was almost a block away. My life spun around love, passion, and friendship from then on. My grades got better, I had more fun than ever, and people began treating me differently. People were drawn to me as I felt more at ease presenting the lady David love. Being with David gave me more confidence. He usually gave me quite high compliments. Though shy among new people, David was good-looking, fit, well-groomed, and friendly. Outstanding even among the teachers, he was the sharpest person in the room. Still, he remained modest and spent his time with me, sometimes remarking, "I'm just a regular guy who won the lottery when we met." Though friends and relatives thought I was cute, I thought of myself as really plain. Though I felt self-conscious, particularly about my gorgeous sorority sisters, David's perspective helped me to see greater value. Prom stood out as the highlight. Every member of my sorority used to rank their partner in front of former members. I never took part since I had no long-term lover previously. David got all great comments this year, first in the 29-year history of the event. Though custom dictated I couldn't tell him he won, I was proud. 3 days later, I found a method to honor him. David drove me home the day after graduation. David had given me a job, hailing from Seattle I was. We held hands and chatted for 4 hours driving. We paused for a kiss and a little brunch. We arrived at my boyhood house just before lunch. David delighted my parents throughout the following 2 hours. His asking whether he could buy my dad a beer startled me a little. They went before I could even start to object. My mother grinned under wet eyes. "Oh, Laura. This one is a keeper. Trust me, Mom, I know." When David and Dad at last arrived 2 hours later, they grinned and laughed all the way to the front door. David said my parents farewell quickly and left. "I'll be back to pick you up for dinner after I check into the hotel." He had requested my father for permission to marry me. Last thing he informed me that evening, I shall never forget it, had magic. David proposed to me atop the Space Needle following a really lovely Italian meal. The evening was lovely, and the lights of the Seattle skyline nearly equaled the brightness in my heart. Making mistakes in college usually made one mildly ashamed. Though I'm sure I was the only sister from the sorority still living in the house, that evening was a priceless present from the matching set David handed me. I could detect it. He was delicate, loving, and slow. One could not have imagined of a more flawless interaction. I asked him, still modest as ever, he said. I read very much. Our existence was rather close to ideal. David started a good career right after graduation. He was under continuous promotion, and I felt happier than I had ever been. I would want to say that these years underline their significance to me rather less than others. I'm not sure how best to describe how delighted I was in our first decade of marriage. I cannot adequately explain how having children entered my life. Those years have nothing to do with my fall from grace. Thus I do not share the specifics of them. Actually, sharing with you those years would only make you more perplexed regarding the causes of my fall. Better said, mistakes. I know what my mistakes are. I know the reason I collapsed. I lacked sufficient faith in David. David was the person I most loved, since he never covered his fragility from me. He shared his whole being with me, more especially his fears. He never ran from me. Long ago, I had nothing to hide. My life told a fairy story. My family was absolutely fantastic. David treated me exactly like a full partner all through. Every choice that touched our life involved me. It made no difference whether he handled our money better or made 5 times my salary. He always looked to me for direction and approval. Though occasionally I felt inadequate, like I wasn't keeping up my end of the bargain. Generally, it made me feel unique. I never gave David this. I never would have destroyed my life had I revealed it. He would have come to my aid. I know he loved me so very much he would have helped me to feel entire. Over years, that small insecurity expanded and intensified. Perhaps it was beginning to blossom. Still, I was lost in my own flesh by the time the children started school. I thought I wanted something different, something that would provide me an autonomous motivation. I was not especially searching for a lover. I liked my man. In the bedroom. I felt perfectly fulfilled, though. Perhaps rather draggy, our existence was passionate. Mostly I was responsible for that. I felt wise spoil a good thing since I knew my hubby wanted to be a little more experimental. Probably the appropriate phrase. No, I wanted to be treated like an equal, not only to feel as such. I then declared that I had accepted a job. I had it all worked out. I was ready to justify my desire for the job. Our debate ran for 4 seconds. I think that sounds fantastic. Whatever makes you happy, and it turned out. I tackled my problem independently. Help was unnecessary for me. It was exciting while it was happening, but looking back, I felt sick from the narcissism of my ideas during those initial months. I felt prepared to take on the world as a strong, self-reliant woman. The vibe around here may be described as flirtatious. A den of immorality would be the worst way to describe it. Everyone I worked with, male and female alike, was young, untamed, and full of life. They had a few affairs while they were in the office. There was a lack of relationships. No one appeared to be trying to cover it up or think it was wrong. It was my boss who was the worst. While I didn't much care for him, Ben Parker was a gorgeous man. He was the target of constant teasing, claims that he couldn't keep a girlfriend, and congratulations on his latest acquisition. Unlike the first guy who hit on me, I took my time getting into bed with him. In fact, I gave him a good thrashing. I began to wonder whether there was something going on in our lives that David and I were ignoring. Nobody in our inner circle spoke a word about this. Compared to the constant barrage I overheard at work, not a single word spoken in our neighborhood even came close. When I introduced Ben to David at our first company Christmas party, my life took a dramatic turn. I could tell they loathed one another despite how well they seemed to get along. When my conversation with David shifted away from my job, I neglected to mention Ben at all. The pressures of his job and boss were evident to me. Changes in the office were also noticeable to me after that night. Ben began to focus intently on me, speaking highly of my public service and asking how I was feeling. He made repeated requests to join me for lunch. We used to argue about our latest project for hours. He started asking me for my opinion more frequently after a few introspective questions. We would end the conversation and get back to business. He started to notice that I looked well, too. After all this time, I can honestly state that he worked on me for months, and I was completely naive. I can no longer recall the exact chain of events that led up to this. Despite my remorse, I thoroughly enjoyed it. My long-suppressed emotions were reawakened by Ben's artful seduction. When I looked back on my deceitful behavior years later, I realized how bad it was. I didn't think David wanted me since I didn't offer him anything to desire. I was aware of the type of man he was. In no world would he do anything to make me feel uneasy. I was his true friend and cherished lover, not his casual girlfriend. Regardless, he paid close attention. My side's smallest proposal would be enough. My desires would have been met with cataclysmic consequences had it been suggested in any way. Looking back on our marriage, I see that I ignored David while he was subtly looking for ways to make us stronger. I must admit, I went above and beyond for Ben. I was a complete dweeb in his eyes. Ben became an obsession before I realized the truth. Personally, I gave Ben a present on his birthday. My outlook was immediately altered by the glaring contrast with David. I was fixing a terrible error while Ben despised me. Ben laughed and shoved me out of his office the day after I told him our affair was over. I returned from lunch to find the package, and a notification to be to Ben's office at 5:30 waiting for me on my desk. I was satisfied with the contents of the delivery. The mental images of Ben became a chain that would keep me trapped in his grip and the misery that would consume my life for the next 18 months and beyond. Having a good time with my 2 coworkers who were waiting for me in Ben's office was a pleasant change of pace from the 18 months of work that lay ahead of me. Not to mention that I was the strumpet in the corporate world. Ben was the person who took advantage of me, and I loathed him almost as much as I hated myself. Despite my greatest efforts, I could not escape. When the evilness of my deeds became too much to bear, the solution to my problems presented itself. Asking me to entertain a strange man in a jam-packed conference room was the last straw. I had missed the answer for so long. Courage. I told Ben, I've had enough, and it doesn't matter who you show the pictures to. He just laughed. That was it. Quite foolish, I felt. When I awoke from my dream, I was shocked to see our house in such disrepair. It seems like David and the kids were doing fine without me. I had a sneaking suspicion that they would have a hard time surviving on the level of neglect I had doted upon them, even if the reality turned out to be the complete opposite. It seemed as if my presence was completely unnecessary. David had everything under control. With his new clothes and car, he gave the impression of being a successful executive. I felt terrible when I realized how long I had ignored my loved ones. In that instant, I made up my mind to dedicate my life to them and make amends for my sin. However, an unseen barrier had grown between us. I frequently wondered how much time had passed. No one ever heard David yell out to me. He regarded me as an intruder, even though we never fought. Putting my best foot forward became crystal clear to me. I wanted to make a case to him. Nothing changed. He was quite gentle with me. After a few months, I took a look at our marriage. There was no communication, no intimacy. This was not going to be my way of life, I decided. Marriage counseling was something I suggested. Our discussion was abruptly ended by David. What I mean is that he just stopped talking nothing for weeks rather than that he stopped believing me. It was as if I were going to pass out. I gave in to a little anxiety as my birthday rolled around. After all, he couldn't possibly ignore my birthday. My word, I was a total dweeb. I got home from work excited to find out what my family had planned, but there was no one home. A small, carefully wrapped package was on the dining room table. I recognized it even before I opened it. Birthday David was forgotten a few years back. I was in such a flurry that I passed by a store on an adjacent street and saw an inexpensive watch. I intended to rectify my mistake later on. Eventually, I ceased thinking about it and never did. He had a purpose in giving it. That was my fault. By the time I went to sleep, I was furious. Keeping the kids away from me on my birthday was just awful. I was taken aback by his behavior and the inappropriate gift. I should have noticed something glaringly wrong. Sufficient symbolic resonance need to have been present. David was a light-skinned man. Nobody I'd ever met before was that kind, considerate, and concerned. I could have saved my marriage if my anger over that awful gift hadn't consumed me to such an extreme degree. Maybe things may have turned out differently if I had admitted my guilt and asked for forgiveness. Instead of focusing on my marriage, I regrettably started thinking about getting a divorce at that very moment. Despite my sadness, I was determined. The process of coordinating all the details with my attorney took a considerable amount of time. David, I informed her, stopped reacting to me, was distant and even angry, ignored my desire for counseling, and kept the kids away from me. My attorney used my comments against me. She was paid well to do the job. The claim was reviewed. I thought I was being fair when I stood up for the things I needed to have a regular life. All that remained was breaking the terrible news. Standing motionless in the foyer of the den, I stared at the man who had been my better half, my husband. It was not him, even though he looked identical. This is it, I've had enough. My wish is for a divorce, David. I could see no emotion on his face despite the long period of silence. He was probably taken aback, even though I thought he smiled. Since his reply went against my expectations, I could only assume that he was. Screaming and interrogation are not tolerated. Very well. That concluded it. On Friday morning, the next day, he got my divorce petition. After that weekend, David felt better, but he couldn't undo his recent decisions. Reconciliation was not something I was interested in. On Monday morning, he went so far as to bid me goodbye at the door as I made my way to work. I believed it was too late. Upon entering the workplace, I sensed that something was amiss, though I remained bewildered as to what it was. Our company's president, our corporate lawyer, and my supervisor were all arguing in the conference room. People were wildly waving stacks of papers. I failed to notice the man who had been waiting for me near my desk because I was too preoccupied in watching the chaos. I was taken aback by his speech. "Is that Laura Johnson? Is that so? Someone is assisting you." After taking a picture of me and giving me a big envelope, the man departed. There was not even an opportunity to sit down, let alone review the letter's contents. Following the man's departure, the HR manager and security guard positioned themselves in front of me. "Mrs. Johnson, I implore you to collect your belongings and vacate this premises. You are currently on administrative leave while we look into allegations of improper activity on your part at work." I felt humiliated as my coworkers watched me grab my belongings. Being escorted outside the premises made it much worse. It was all a mystery to me. Just as I was about to exit the parking lot, my phone started ringing. At least my lawyer was. Even before I could introduce myself, she was giving me the silent treatment. She was being made to look like an idiot, and crucial information was being withheld in the only coherent lines. Silently, I made my way home. Once again, when I arrived at the house, it was deserted. Until I had cooled down enough to remember the envelope, I had no idea what terror I had unleashed. David's answer was strongly worded. Almost every one of my adulterous encounters was documented. Nowhere could I locate any funds. He had nearly depleted our funds. The word infidelity had the greatest impact on me. There is no worse thing that I can think of. Then I called my parents. Someone needed to reassure me. My dad scolded me for hanging up and being a brat. He didn't have to explain his position to me. My identity is already well known. It felt like the most lonely 7 days of my life at the time, but looking back, I remember them as the happiest. After David left a letter, I went over to see what he had done. He had gone camping with the kids and would return on Sunday. On that first night, my older friend Rebecca phoned to see how I was doing. It was about 7 o'clock. According to her, David had delivered a DVD, and she wanted me to keep it a secret. During the following 2 days, my lawyer elaborated on how hopeless my situation is. For some reason, I was being let off. There was a litigation involving my company, a few of my clients, and all of my partners. My children's guardianship would be revoked. It would be my ultimate sacrifice. By this point, I was prepared to resort to any means necessary to prevent David from pursuing the several cases. In anticipation of his return, I made an effort to prepare. To my dismay, I realized that I was still in tears. When my family returned home, I was in a quiet state. The kids walked right by me, like if I didn't exist. A few moments down the road, David casually strode by, beer in hand, as if it were of no consequence. Talking was almost out of my reach. You have the power to destroy me. Seriously, I'm crossing my fingers. I attempted to bring up our past as a married couple, but he insulted me. I was overwhelmed by the hatred in his voice. At that very moment, I had completely disengaged from him. Just talking aloud was all I was doing. But David went into a hysterical fit that lasted for a few minutes. Bovine, vulvar, and tuba. He stood up and left the room after each word sliced me to shreds. Actually, I may say that I kept going. Whenever I attempted to resolve the issue with David, he did not respond. Despite the fact that David and the kids appeared to be doing great, I was concerned about their financial condition. From time to time, I would sneak in to watch him bring them to or drop them off at school. While looking for work, I was collecting unemployment benefits. My parents shied away from talking to me. Going from friend to friend became my new normal. Typically men seeking housing after a divorce. The group didn't intend to remain for long. A day came when everything was perfect. The next day, they demanded that I go. On my attorney's recommendation, I started going to therapy. According to her, I would do better in court if I sought professional help and made amends for my acts. Optimism was non-existent for me. We have already covered the majority of these topics. Some issues I resolved. The last piece of advice my therapist gave me was the most valuable. Her advice was to flee as quickly as possible. For what reason he decided to respond to me, I am utterly confused. Somehow, when I returned home, David had left a box for me. Something completely different, like a phone call, an email, or one of the many letters I penned. The standard retail packaging was immediately recognizable to me. Someone was quite rude in their message to me on the card. Everything is under my control. In a sense, he knew the whole world. He had an unmistakable plan for how I should spend my time and genuinely hated me. However, I failed to comprehend why the realization that he was aware of my willing treachery was disproportionately distressing. Indeed, it was. Many tears were shed by me. Robert, a kind man and a friend, was housing me at the time. It seems to me that he had higher intentions for our relationship than a simple housemate arrangement. The fact that he came into the room to determine the problem made it clear to me that he had been drinking, infuriated upon discovering the parcel. Before I could intervene, he dashed out the door. My worries intensified a few hours later when Robert still hadn't returned home. In the way that I should have been, the nurses at the hospital were not overly talkative, even though they were familiar with the story. It seems that Robert had confronted David. Nearly killed by David, he had survived. A complete disaster had befallen him. He sustained a concussion in addition to serious internal injuries and a fractured left hip. When I felt the chills, I became completely limp. Close by, my problems were now influencing others. At our next appointment, I brought this up with my therapist. Things started off with her asking David questions. I told her everything I knew. He grew up as an only child. No one cared for him. During his teenage years, he was abandoned by his parents. I told her about our childhood love and his undying devotion to the kids and to me. I filled her in on his actions during the 18 months he should have been aware of my infidelity and subsequent actions. I also told her about David's treatment of Robert. After I finished, she appeared terrified. Same here. I took to the run. I ran away from my perfect life's memories and landed in a terrible college town in Idaho, where I found an even worse job. I finally met a man a few years down the road who could put my insecurities in the past. He didn't stink or beat me, which is the greatest thing I can say about him. There was never any romantic affection between us, all was politeness. Part of my punishment was obviously that My elder children wanted to greet me and reassure me that they were alive and well when they contacted me. I was never invited to visit them or given any kind of substantial role in their lives. Even without my help, David excelled. I kept tabs on his news as often as possible. He was always quite wealthy and a superstar in the software industry. There was very little published about his private life. His presence was once again felt at her wedding. Surprisingly, I was invited. To all appearances, he was handsome. My heart belonged to him, the man I had betrayed. Admittedly, I was taken aback when he rose to his final bow. First, you ruined my life. Just so we're clear. My ugly wedding band was staring back at you. For some reason, I wished I had it on my finger right then. How wonderful that you met someone. I wish him happiness for you. He disappeared.